right. So I said we were going to make a sword, so we better do that. So to start with, go ahead and download the reference image. I'm going to put a link to it in the description because we're gonna want a reference image for this. And what I'm going to do is, first of all, make sure you have the images as planes add-on installed. You can just add reference images in Blender. If you go Shift A, image, reference image, you can select your image and bring it in, and then it brings it in like this. The reason I don't like this is because you can't really like trim it very easily and change it, because it's not actually like a physical object, it's an empty, and so I can't go into edit mode on this. And so there's an add-on for Blender called Images as Planes, which makes this easier. If you go edit preferences, go to your add-ons and search for Images as Planes, just make sure that that's ticked on, and then go to Shift A, image, and now underneath reference images you'll have this Images as Planes option. So locate the image, again download that reference image and then add it in here as a plane, and you can see we've added a plane. If I go into material preview mode, you'll see we can see it, and it's going to come in like this. So I'm going to hit 1 to go into front view mode, and then RZ 90, and then RX minus 90, or RY minus 90. There we go, to get it sort of positioned the way that I want, and that's pretty good. There we go. And now we've got a reference image in our scene. A nice thing about having this in here too like this is that we can lock it. So up here in the top right under filter, we have the option here to turn on this selectable, and if you turn that on, it adds an extra row of icons here, and what you can do is just click this to turn it off, and now we can't select this image anymore. So that's a great way to add reference images to your scenes, and now you can lock them in place. So this is just going to sort of chill in the background as we sort of model around it over top of it. The sword is actually a little bit tricky to model, and the reason is because of this groove in the middle. We want to have that depressed, but we don't want it to cause any sort of like weird shading effects. And so we haven't really talked about edge flow yet, but in order to get this sort of the way that we want, we would like to be able to add a loop cut around that so that it can have sort of a sharp edge when we subdivide the blade. And we would also like to be able to add a loop cut that goes sort of this way, running the extent of the blade and then around. Oops, I didn't draw that very well. Running the extent of the blade up like this and then around like this. Or running the extent of the blade this way and then another one this way. And the reason is that we would like to have a very crisp edge there, and we may even want to put a different material on sort of the very edge so that it appears sharpened. So in order to achieve that, and this reference image has this groove pretty far down, but normally it would be a little higher up like this. And in order to achieve that, what we want to do is we want to have something like this as the topology for our blade. That way we can Control R to add a loop cut this way and also one this way, and that will define sort of that inside edge of this groove and then also the edge of the blade. So this is a pretty simple shape. You just sort of have to think about it in advance to make sure that you're sort of doing it in a way that makes sense. So I'm going to hit Shift A, Mesh Plane to add a plane, and then RX 90, and S2 scale that down. And actually, before we do that, I want to make sure that our reference image is to scale. So hit N to open the side panel. I've just turned this selection back on, and Control A, apply the rotation and scale, and then I want to scale it down until it's around 1 meter. I don't know if that's, yeah, that should be all right. A meter is about right. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's good to get the real world scale sort of correct up front. So I'm just relocking that reference image and bringing this plane down here, and let's start constructing that geometry. And so again, we wanted something like this, so we can do that pretty easily. I'm just going to scale down our plane, tab into edit mode, and what I'm going to do is Control R to add a loop cut down the center of our plane, and just box select these two verts on the right and X to delete. And the reason I'm doing that is because with a symmetrical model like this, it's good to not model everything twice. And because it's symmetrical, we can just go in here into the modifiers tab and add a mirror modifier and turn on clipping, and Control A to apply the rotation and scale on our plane if you haven't already done so, and just make sure that it's set to mirror over the x-axis. And so now we only have to model this left half, and that's going to affect everything on the right half of the model as well. So tab into edit mode, and I'm just going to grab this top vert here and drag it down here like this. And it's okay if you didn't draw this using the annotation tool. In fact, I can just erase it like that. There we go. And GX to bring this over. And the way that we can do this is hit K to there. This should be a little bit cleaner for you to see. And so the way that we can do this is to hit K to open up the knife tool. And I'm just going to go like click here on the bottom, and then come up a little bit like this, and then click again, and then click here on this edge here on the right and hit enter, and then K again to knife tool from here to this point up here, and then we can add a loop cut in here like that. And so now you can see like this area here, this is going to form that groove, and this is forming the outer edge of the blade, and we can Control R to add a loop cut here on the edge like we wanted, and here on the inside like we wanted. So I'm going to Control Z because I don't want to do that yet, but we've set up the geometry that's required for us to be able to do that later. And there we go. So this is pretty clean. So now let's go ahead and select these bottom three and EZ to extrude all the way, and I'm just GZ and dragging all the way to the bottom. Now it should be a bit wider at the bottom than at the top, so I'm going to grab this bottom left vert here and just GX to drag it out, and we can make the groove a little bit wider here at the bottom as well. By the way, if you're finding this a little bit hard to see on a white background, you can just give it a material and change its color, and I'm just gonna select our reference image here and just GY just a hair so that it's sort of in the background. There we go. And now we can see this sort of over top of everything much more easily. All right, so that's good. Now, what we would like to do is to create the profile for the sword so that it sort of, obviously it flares out a little bit in the middle. So we can do that by hitting Alt-click to select this inner edge here. And we also want to click this vert here. And so we've got this whole inside edge here, and I'm just gonna hit GY to drag it out a little bit in this direction. Actually, that's gonna make it a little more difficult for you to see. Why don't we make it sort of a gray color like this? And now you can see we've got that profile that we want here. All right, now what we would like to do is to have this get thinner towards the end of the blade, because right now it's the same width all the way down, and we obviously don't want that. So what we can do is, you can see we extended this edge all the way to the bottom. We can just adjust it here at the top. So I'm just going to select these top 4 verts. I'm ignoring the one at the bottom of the blade, and 3 to go into side view mode, and I'm just going to hit GY to bring that back in a little bit, like that. And something like that's probably okay. And bearing in mind that this will get double the thickness because this is currently only half of the blade. And actually, let's add the other half. So if you go into the modifier properties here, we had mirror on X turned on. Let's turn on mirror in Y, and let's just hide our reference image for a second so that you can see that now it's mirroring both in the Y direction and in the X direction. So that's looking pretty good. Now we're going to have a problem with clipping here, and the reason is that this groove currently is too deep. So if we go into side view mode and Alt Z to go into X-ray view, you can see that these verts here in the middle are actually touching the center point of the object, and so like these edges here, they're going to get merged with the center of the object, and we don't want that. We don't want the groove to go all the way through. And to fix that, we can just, I'm going to turn off that Y for a second and grab this vert and this vert, so just the inside of this groove, and also the one here at the bottom. And then I'm going to go 3 to side view mode and GY to just bring it out a little bit so that it has some depth to it, but it's not extending like all the way through the object. And then if we turn this Y back on, now it's merging, but it's not merging in the center of that groove, which is good. So let's do that, and then let's apply the mirror modifier and just make sure that here in the center, like if I turn the sensitivity down to, or up to like, I don't know, 0.005, you can see it's like it's merging these pieces here in the middle. So like this here, remember we didn't want that groove merged in the center. Well, that's currently getting merged here. Like if I were to apply this, you would see that those verts in the center of the groove are merged. You can see here it's right in the middle, it's not where the vert is, and we don't want that. So just make sure that those aren't getting merged and then hit apply, and that should be fine. Now let's go ahead and add a subdivision surface modifier, and you're going to find that this gets all wonky as it does because we don't have edge creases or proximity loops to hold the geometry anywhere. So let's do that. I'm going to turn the levels on the Subsurf modifier up to 2, right click and shade smooth, and then just tab into edit mode, and I want to add a couple of loop cuts. I want to add one on the outer edge of the blade like that, and we have to do the same thing on both sides, and then one on the inside as well. And again, we also have to do the same thing on both sides, so we'll do it on this thing. And there we go. That's looking pretty good. Now, if you want to have a sharper tip on your sword, not all swords had a super sharp tip. You can do that. There are 2 ways to achieve that. They both have different effects. So if I were to add a loop cut here and just drag it up and do the same on the other side, you can see now we've got a sharp tip. However, we've also got a sharp line here, and that's because we're adding a proximity loop to that area there, and that's going to sharpen up the geometry as it's being subdivided in that area. And this may be a look that you like. You know, some swords did look like this, so this is not unrealistic. The other way would be to keep this smooth look but only sharpen the tip, and the way to do that would be to use an edge crease. So if you click this and this, this one, this top edge on both sides, and hit Control E edge crease and turn that up, you can see that now sharpens that tip, but we still have this smooth area here. That's up to you. That's, you know, more of a style choice than anything else. Doesn't really have any significant effect on the model. The topology is very similar either way, so I will leave that up to you. I'm going to leave mine like this because I think that it looks a little bit better. All right, now I do want to do one more thing to the shape of the blade, and that is if you hit 7 and you look at the top, it's very flat. And some swords probably were flat like this. I think it would look a little bit better if it had sort of a more like hollow ground, like rounded profile to the inside. And so to do that, what we can do is Control R to add another loop cut in the center, and Control R to add another one on the back, so it's on both sides. And I'm going to hit Alt click and Alt Shift click to make sure that I have this one and this one selected. So we've got the loop cuts selected just on sort of the inside of the blade here on each side, and I'm going to hit SY 0.7. And you can see now we've got more of a rounded profile on the inside of this instead of it being totally flat. I know that's a small detail, but we want to try and get the geometry as correct as possible because I would like this asset to look really good. All right, so now let's make the guard. So I'm going to go Shift A Mesh Cube because a cube I think is a good base for that. And I'm going to try and mimic the one here from the reference. And the way that we can do that is just scale it down till it's about the correct size. And then I'm noticing as I just look at this that it looks very much like an octagon pattern. And the way that you can make that is a cube has 4 sides. If you subdivide it once, it will have 8. So I'm going to go Subsurf and just simple so that it doesn't change the geometry of the cube, and then just apply it. And now we have a cube, but it's got 8 verts on every side instead of 4, and so that's that should be good for us. So I'm going to hit SX to scale it up in the x-axis, and then I'm going to Alt click these 4 edges and just hit SZ. There we go. And now it also looks like that gets sort of like what the front face of this object is widest at this point, and then the whole thing gets narrow, sort of more towards the center. So let's do that, and an easy way to do that would be with proportional editing. So tab into edit mode, and I'm going to hit Control R to add maybe 3 loop cuts here, and Control R to add again maybe 3 loop cuts on this side, and that should be fine. And I'm going to Control click this and this and turn on proportional editing, and then in front view just hit SZ, and if you don't have the circle, again just scroll in until you see it's about the correct size, and I'm just gonna scale that down like that much maybe, and that's looking pretty good. And then I'm going to select these 2 front verts and the same on the back, and just turn off proportional editing with O, and then SZ to scale that up a little bit. And that looks pretty accurate to the original, I think. In terms of shape, it just needs to be a little bit smoother. So let's add a Subsurf modifier with maybe 2 levels. Right click the object and hit Shade Smooth. You can see it looks completely smooth now. We want it to maintain that geometry. And on something like this, an easy way to do that is just going to be to select all, and then Control E, add an edge crease, and then I'm just going to drag that edge crease up like that. There we go. And maybe give that like 3 levels, and that's fine. And you may not want it to be creased on these inner loops, and that's fine. You can just Alt Shift click to select all of them, and maybe not this inner one too, and hit Control E, edge crease -1 to get rid of the edge crease just on those areas. And there you go. Now we've got a pretty good looking handguard. All right, so let's make the handle next. So the handle on this is pretty simple. This sort of ridged pattern, I haven't decided what to do for the handle on ours yet. I don't know if we'll go for something like this or something different, but it's probably best to handle that through materials rather than to model it. So for the handle itself, let's add a cylinder. So Shift A mesh cylinder and then scale it down, and we're just going to position it where it should go here, and I'm just going to... And one thing that we can't see from the reference image is how much this handle flares out. However, or this guard flares out rather in the middle, it should be wider than the handle because the handle goes like into it, right? If we hide these two with H, you can see that like it's over top of the handle. The handle is going into it. So that that guard needs to be wider than this handle piece that we're adding. So Alt H to unhide, and I'm just going to select that central loop here and turn on proportional editing with O, and SY to scale it up in, and make it about that wide is probably fine. Something like that should be good. And we are doing a little bit of guesswork here, but sometimes you have to. And there we go. So now this handle here, I'm just gonna drag it until it's sort of sticking into this other piece, and that's fine. These are separate objects that won't cause any problems, and we can merge them later if we have to. And what I'm going to do now is just to grab this face here on the bottom of that, and I'm going to extrude and then scale. Oops, O to turn off proportional editing, extrude and scale, and then extrude down, and then extrude and scale, and then extrude this all the way to the bottom, and then scale that to the appropriate size, and extrude and scale, and extrude and scale. And I'm just sort of matching the shape of this roughly. It doesn't have to be exact, and something like that is probably fine. And right click to shade that smooth. And then on this face here, you can see we've got this weird shading artifact here, and again, that's because we have smooth shading turned on, and so the shading is averaging like from this big round face all the way to here. And so to fix that, we can just inset that bottom face, or in our case, because it's going to be hidden, you can actually hit X, delete face, and we can just delete it because we're never going to see that face. So it doesn't need to be there. And there we go. And then we can actually, if you hit /, it'll isolate this object so that we can just work on it for a second, and tab, and we can actually delete this top one as well, because we don't need that there either, because it's also hidden from view. And / to come out of that isolated view. All right, so this bottom piece is going to be very easy to make out of a cylinder, so let's do that. Shift A mesh cylinder, and let's scale it down, and something like this width is probably close enough. And what I'm going to do is put a loop cut in the center, and then go into vertex mode and delete all of these bottom pieces and just scale it down a bit. And that's because we're going to mirror this as well, because again, this is a symmetrical object. So I'll add a mirror modifier, Control A to apply rotation and scale, and I would like it to be mirrored only in the Z axis. There we go. And now we can just work on one half of this, and it'll apply to both halves. So to make this shape, I'm just going to do, again, a little bit of guesswork here, just sort of by looking at it. And actually, let's hide the reference image here. I'm just going to inset and GZ and I to inset and GZ, and then I to inset again. And you can make this look however you want, really. And inset again and extrude. And inset like that. And maybe just add a couple of proximity loops here to these edges that should be sharp. And I think the whole thing should probably be a lot more thin like that, and this should be maybe not so tall, so we'll just something like that is probably okay. Let's see how that compares. I think that looks pretty all right. All right, so now I'm gonna hit RX 90 to just position that where it's supposed to go. And I guess it should be a bit wider, so SY. And let's add a Subsurf modifier to that as well. And there we go. All right, so let's actually hide our reference image. All right, so let's go ahead and apply the mirror modifier on that pommel here, and make sure the mirror modifiers are applied on all of these. And so we're gonna hit all of these and Control A, apply rotation and scale. And then for all of these now, you notice they're not sort of lined up, and that's because we sort of eyeballed where some of these pieces were going. And so to fix that, we can just select all of these and do origin to geometry, and then Shift S, selection to cursor, and that's going to put everything in the exact center. And so now I can just hit GZ to bring this up, and GZ to bring this handle to where the guard should be, and just sort of put these pieces back where they should be, and everything will be exactly perfectly aligned. All right, so that's looking not too bad. We'll stop here and then move on to sort of UV unwrapping and getting some materials going for this object. So that's it for now, and I will see you in the next video.